James Bond, a franchise known for its complex web of deceit, high-stakes power struggles, and bitter rivalries. A world where alliances are forged and broken with ease, and the players are always looking for an angle to gain the upper hand. A realm where secrets are currency and the truth is only revealed to those who hold the power. A landscape marked by twists and turns where loyalties are tested and betrayals are a commonplace. And guess what? I'm not even talking about the seminal Spy's big-screen escapades. Behind the martini-sipping, globe-trotting, and high-octane action, an arguably even more intriguing drama has been unfolding for decades.
You know, that's not half bad.
Welcome to the battle over James Bond film intellectual rights, where the real-life drama just might be more thrilling than any fictional plot hatched by Ernst Stavro Blofeld Inspector, where producers and studios engage in a game of cat and mouse, and the prize is control over the most iconic super spy franchise in history.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
One of the most fascinating chapters in this saga is the story of Warhead, a James Bond film that almost was, then wasn't, then kinda was, then almost was again a couple times, then never was. Developed in the 1970s by Kevin McClory, Len Deighton, and the original James Bond himself, Sean Connery, Warhead was meant to be a grittier take on the Bond franchise with some truly crazy elements thrown in for good measure. It became a casualty of war between conflicting creative forces, leaving us to wonder what could have been and just how and why the movie went unmade. Our story actually dates back to 1958, when James Bond novel author Ian Fleming met filmmaker Kevin McClory and christened him the man to bring the character to the screen. Rather than adapting an existing novel, they recruited playwright Jack Whittingham and penned the script they eventually named Thunderball. Richard Burton, who would go on to act in a different British spy novel adaptation, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, was discussed to play the lead, and the master of suspense himself, Alfred Hitchcock, was considered to direct. Rather than continue the pitch, Fleming absconded with the story and turned it into a novel. This understandably upset McClory, who sued Fleming and won, maintaining screen rights. This posed to be a bit of a problem for Albert R. Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, who were producing the films at this time. Dan Jack and Eon Productions, who have been behind pretty much every official James Bond film production, were interested in adapting the Thunderball story as the first James Bond film, but that obviously was complicated by the legal situation. They instead went forward with Dr. No in 1962, From Russia with Love in 1963, and Goldfinger in 1964. The success of these films proved James Bond to be a valuable cinematic property, and when they decided to do Thunderball, well, they had to deal with McClory. So, in 1965, Albert R. Broccoli and Harry Saltzman brought on McClory as a producer so that they could do this film, and indeed, it turned out to be arguably the most successful James Bond film of all time, grossing nearly $1.4 billion worldwide if you adjust for inflation. The story and film's underwater elements were inspired by McClory's own passion for scuba diving. McClory's efforts were rewarded with a producer and writer credit. As part of the arrangement, McClory retained future film rights to the story but agreed not to produce another Thunderball film for 10 years following. The idea, of course, was that audiences would seemingly be over the whole Bond thing by then anyway, wouldn't they? Well, you probably see where this is going. Audiences are, to this day, still not over the whole Bond thing, and exactly 10 years later, 1975, Kevin McClory began work on his own Thunderball adaptation. It was initially titled James Bond of the Secret Service, and McClory brought on two new writers. One of them is Len Deighton, author of the spy novel centered on the character that on the big screen was called Harry Palmer, who was portrayed by Michael Caine, and in fact, those movies were all produced by Harry Saltzman, one of the James Bond producers, starting with The Ipcress File in 1965. Deighton had since downplayed his contributions. The other was the first man to play James Bond on the silver screen, one Sean Connery. Now, how did he get Connery? Well, even though Connery claimed to be done with the franchise after 1971's Diamonds Are Forever, fact is, he always had a bit of a bone to pick with the producers over what he thought were unfair terms, namely that he got screwed out of some of the profits. So, he was actually eager to make another James Bond film, but on his own terms, and definitely not for Albert R. Broccoli and Harry Saltzman. He lent a certain legitimacy to the McClory production that earned it backing from Paramount Pictures under the name Warhead. Now, the two versions of the Warhead script that have made it into the hands of the public, one from 1976 and one from 1978, don't exactly read as a movie that ever really could have been made in 1975. In fact, one might even say that the scripts are absolutely absurd and kind of ridiculous. So, here's a bit of a breakdown of where they land, and I'm going to warn you as a James Bond fan, not particularly good.
No, it's the right size. me, that is.
So in the script, blame for all the missing airplanes that flew over the Bermuda Triangle are placed on the shoulder of the villainous Spectre organization. Their massive underwater base hosts every abducted airplane and vessel. It's been dubbed Quapolis, and the entire city-sized base combs the ocean floor, mining for gold and minerals. At the helm is Bond's oftentimes nemesis, Ernst Stavro Blofeld, a role that was earmarked for Orson Welles, who was written, of course, as cartoonishly callous, killing 4 of his own men for minor infractions within the first act. His main heavy, which in this case is literal, was Bomba in the early drafts and Genghis in the latest. There's direction in the final script that compares his overwhelming physical dominance favorably to legendary boxer Muhammad Ali, though in terms that would probably get the writer cancelled nowadays. Speaking of ambition, the villain Blofeld's ambition is a world where water takes up even more of the global surface and the downfall of the world's major financial institutions. Spectre steals 3 nuclear bombs, 2 to detonate underneath Antarctica to flood the world, and 1 to use against the institutions responsible for the polluted state of the world. So of course Bond has to solve the mystery before it's too late, and there's a jab at the Americans in the form of Q using the concentration of fecal matter collected by Aquapolis to narrow down the location of one of the potential nuclear bombs to New York City. New York City begins reporting rampant shark attacks, but they're no ordinary sharks. They're mechanical sharks, escorting a mechanical hammerhead hosting the nuclear bomb aimed at Wall Street by way of the New York City tunnels. And the jabs at Americans continue as the script repeatedly mentions how full the sewer path is with human waste. Blofeld looks on from his command center, and it's in, of course, the Statue of Liberty, the head of the Statue of Liberty. And Connery himself apparently even climbed to the top to scout location, which takes an astounding 162 steep steps. In the script, Bond battles sharks and is pursued by Bomba/Genghis, who falls victim to a particularly indiscriminate shark.
And that is to have sharks with frickin' laser beams attached to their heads.
What happens next could appear in the dictionary next to Deus Ex Machina, as Bond latches on to a nuclear-toting mechanical hammerhead and struggles until he happens to swim near Q, who's able to easily and instantly disable the bomb's timer. The Heavy is dispatched. The plan is spoiled. Blofeld is still at large atop the Statue of Liberty, which in the script actually has a tear of blood seeping from its eye. Bond skis over, then paraglides into the eye of the Statue of Liberty to pursue the villain. Blofeld rappels down the 300-foot, 90-meter length of the statue, something that's not very easy to imagine Orson Welles, who was quite heavy at the time, doing. And Bond, of course, chases him and manages to end the Spectre boss once and for all, or at least, in this movie. Bond romances no less than 3 Bond girls throughout the course of the script. One introduces herself as Justine Loves It, prompting Bond's playful response, "Oh, does she?" Another, Spectre agent Fatima Blush, has a dalliance with Bond in a hot tub, during which she tells him, "I could read you like a book." And she follows that up with some intimate touching, prompting the super spy's response, "Well, this must be the Braille system you're using." They also get together on a hotel bed with another Spectre agent, this one posing as a hotel maid, hiding underneath the bed the entire time before the whole place explodes. After dispatching Blofeld and narrowly escaping as Aquapolis crashes into a cliff, Bond makes off with and makes out with Domino, Blush's identical twin sister, in Blofeld's private submarine. Now, Bond adherents may notice the similarities to Eon's 1977 film, The Spy Who Loved Me. There's a large underwater installation operated by a madman bent on destruction of society for the sake of saving the environment. There's the outsized henchman who fights a shark, there's the stolen nukes aimed at New York City, and there's the final escape aboard a private submarine. Even if you didn't notice, Warhead producer Kevin McClory and Eon producer Cubby Broccoli certainly did, and they were locked in legal battles for over 5 years, with the originator of those shared elements being at issue. Eon alleged that McClory was straying way too far from the Thunderball story he maintained the rights to, and McClory alleged that Eon stole elements from his story to undermine his production. Regardless of who was right, the legal complications, along with the ballooning proposed budget, were enough to scare Connery and Paramount away, and the Warhead project was effectively halted, while The Spy Who Loved Me moved forward by renaming their beloved character Carl Stromberg. A shell of Warhead would go on to become Never Say Never Again in 1983, which is more of a straightforward Thunderball remake. Producer Jack Schwartzman, father of Jason Schwartzman and husband of Talia Shire, brought on his brother-in-law Francis Ford Coppola to help write, and Irving Kershner, fresh off the success of The Empire Strikes Back, to direct. Sean Connery was lured back to play the lead with promises of creative control and profit sharing, along with a $3 million run-of-picture deal, about $9.5 million in 2024 money. Never Say Never Again competed almost directly with Eon's Octopussy, which was released earlier the same year. Despite a troubled production, the McClory-Schwartzman-Connery vehicle actually had a better opening weekend than Octopussy, although in the end it didn't gross quite the same at the box office as the mainline entry. Kevin McClory, though, wasn't done with his attempts to bring Bond back to the silver screen. He began development on a cartoon series called James Bond vs. Spectre, but Eon beat him to the punch, perhaps unintentionally, with the non-canonical James Bond Jr. in 1991. He soon renamed his Warhead script Warhead 8 and then Warhead 2000 and moved Orson Welles to the director's chair. Then, of course, Welles died in 1986. McClory got support from Sony Pictures eventually and actually pitched Liam Neeson or Timothy Dalton to play the lead. Sony funded a lawsuit against MGM in pursuit of royalties owed to McClory for every prior James Bond film, alleging him as the originator of the character on the screen. The lawsuit was unsuccessful. The movie was effectively dead after Sony traded Bond to MGM for Spider-Man in 1995 before buying MGM outright in 2005. MGM bought the rights to Never Say Never Again, and in 1997, Kevin McClory passed away in 2006, and with him passed the potential for a rival James Bond film. The heirs settled with Eon in 2013, and the film rights to the Thunderball story, the Spectre organization, and the Blofeld character all reverted to the company, opening the door for their inclusion in 2015's Spectre. The story of the unmade James Bond film Warhead serves as a reminder of the high stakes and bitter rivalries that shaped the film industry, and especially the James Bond franchise. Despite the best efforts of Kevin McClory, his vision for a grittier, more ambitious James Bond film ultimately was thwarted by legal battles and creative differences, and I have to say, his own scripts, because the Warhead script, had it gotten made as a movie, would have been absolutely absurd. The legacy of the unmade scripts persists in the form of elements that formed uncanny coincidences with the contemporary Spy Who Loved Me and the foundations of Never Say Never Again. With rumors swirling around who will take up the next James Bond mantle after Daniel Craig, we're left to wonder what could have been, and well, what's still to come.